Once the dream destination for many, Canada is now facing challenges that make it seem more like a nightmare for some. Inflation is soaring, families are struggling to afford basic necessities, and over 600,000 people rely on government assistance. People are even sleeping in their cars because they can't afford rent. Canada, once portrayed as a land of opportunity, safety, and high quality of life for immigrants, has changed dramatically. In this video, I'll explore why fewer people are choosing to live in Canada today. Stay tuned to discover what's really happening. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let's dive in. A few years ago, Canada appeared to be the ideal place to build a new life. When Justin Trudeau took office in 2015, he promised a better, more inclusive future for all. His message was one of hope, a young, charismatic leader who vowed to tackle inequality, provide affordable housing, and improve the well-being of every Canadian. Optimism surged as many believed that change was on the horizon. But over time, those promises began to fade, and the Canadian dream turned into something far less desirable for many. Trudeau's government introduced initiatives like the National Housing Strategy, promising billions of dollars to improve housing accessibility. He spoke passionately about raising wages, protecting workers, and easing the burden of living costs. Yet, as the years passed, it became clear that the government was unable to keep pace with its lofty ambitions. Real estate prices soared, especially in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, while wages remained stagnant. The dream of home ownership slipped further out of reach for countless Canadians, and even those fortunate enough to own property saw their tax bills and living costs rise. Renting became equally unmanageable. With vacancy rates under 2%, cities were flooded with renters but starved for available homes. Rents spiked, and even the smallest apartments were priced at over $3,000 per month in places like Toronto and Vancouver. Families were crammed into tiny spaces, and some were even forced to live in their cars. The housing crisis has become so severe that stories of people living in cars have made national headlines, highlighting the grim reality of Canada's housing landscape. In Vancouver, one of the world's priciest cities, the situation is equally dire. Many residents face the grim choice of spending a majority of their income on rent or enduring unsafe living conditions. Young people, recent graduates, and immigrants who came to Canada seeking a better future now find themselves trapped in overcrowded apartments or struggling to find affordable housing at all. This crisis is compounded by a rise in homelessness. Makeshift camps are popping up in public spaces, and the sight of homeless individuals living in the streets has become more common. The construction of new housing has failed to keep up with demand, and while the government has announced initiatives to address the issue, real progress has been slow and largely ineffective. If things do not change soon, more people will be pushed into desperate living situations or forced to leave cities in search of affordable housing elsewhere. Part of the problem lies in the government's decision to encourage mass immigration to address labor shortages and an aging population. While this strategy may have its merits, it has intensified the housing crisis. The influx of students and international workers has further strained the already overburdened real estate market, driving up prices and reducing options for both new arrivals and long-time residents. International students, eager for a brighter future, now find themselves living in overcrowded dorms or cramped apartments, struggling to make ends meet. What was once a land of opportunity has become a battleground for housing, where the promise of a better life often turns into a fight for survival. Canada's housing crisis is a stark reminder that good intentions are not always enough. Without decisive action, the dream of a stable, affordable life in Canada will remain just that, a dream for too many people. The strain of mass immigration on Canada's public services has become undeniable. Schools, hospitals, and public transportation systems are buckling under the weight of a growing population, yet the government has failed to invest in the necessary infrastructure to meet the demand. Canadians are facing longer healthcare wait times, gridlocked traffic in major cities, and overcrowded schools with limited space for immigrant children. While these issues compound daily frustrations, the most pressing crisis remains housing. Despite repeated promises, many Canadians still face the harsh reality of being unable to afford a place to live, with some left to wander the streets. The housing crisis, coupled with an ever-increasing cost of living, has put countless families in financial peril. In 2023, over 2 million Canadians were forced to rely on food banks or government assistance just to eat. For many, the choice between paying rent and buying groceries has become an agonizing daily decision. Inflation has surged to levels no one anticipated, pushing the prices of basic goods, milk, bread, eggs, skyrocketing, and making life even more difficult for low and middle-income families. Wages that once provided financial stability are no longer enough to cover the rising costs. The financial crisis has spread far beyond the most vulnerable, leaving even those who once had secure livelihoods struggling to make ends meet. While global factors like the pandemic and the Ukraine conflict contributed to the price hikes, Canada's concentrated market, dominated by a handful of companies, has made it especially vulnerable. The lack of competition in essential goods has allowed prices to spiral out of control. Despite Canada's abundance of natural resources, oil and gas prices have soared, driving heating and fuel costs to unaffordable levels. This, paired with rising energy bills, has left many Canadians questioning how much longer they can sustain their daily lives. This perfect storm of rising rent, taxes, and living costs has created a dire situation for Canadian families. As the government's measures to curb inflation and protect the most vulnerable fall short, millions of Canadians turn to food banks, a number nearly double that of previous years. For many, the grim reality is that salaries no longer cover the basics: rent, utilities, and food, and credit cards or loans are becoming the only option to keep afloat. But this path only deepens the cycle of debt, as increasing interest rates make it harder to escape. Though the federal government has offered temporary measures, like incentives for low-income families, these solutions are widely seen as inadequate. Without meaningful action to control inflation and address the spiraling cost of living, Canada, once seen as a beacon of prosperity, now teeters on the edge of financial collapse, leaving its citizens to fight for survival in a system that seems increasingly unfair. Thank you for watching the video until the end, and I'll see you in the next one.